Well, good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, January 28th, 2025, and this is the news that we are waking up to. I'm Peter Alexievich. Last night, I got some sleep. We did have one drone hit in Kyiv. Of the 100 drones that Russia sent at the territory of Ukraine last night, 65 were shot down, 28 were returned with active countermeasures. That's a 93% interception rate. At the time of this recording, there were no casualties reported last night, and about one drone hit in Odessa, Kyiv, Sumy, Poltava, Cherkasy, Chernihiv, and Kharkiv regions. So, again, some damage reported to private homes, apartment complexes, businesses, cars were damaged in one case. But by the grace of God, no injuries nor deaths have been reported at this time. The big news today is once again the Ryazan oil refinery in Voronezh. This Rosneft property is now shut down. This is the third largest oil refinery in Russia. They process 17 million tons of crude oil every year. It's responsible for something like 7% of all of the refining capacity in Russia, and it is offline. It is estimated now that Russian refining capacity is down 22%. 22%. Can you imagine? You're living in a world where you have a just in time delivery mechanism in place, right? You have some storage, you have some reserves, but Ukraine's been hitting them. Ukraine's hit 36 oil depots, burned over 1 million tons of refined oil products and oil in the last 6 weeks. This is going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem. So the double tap on Ryazan appears to have been extraordinarily successful. We know that the hydro treatment unit was damaged or likely destroyed. We know at least 3 oil tanks burned. We know that a second hit on other critical infrastructure on the grounds of the plant appeared to have shut it down completely. Now, how long that's going to last, how quickly the Russians can get it back up and running is another question. But for right now, this puts a big dent in providing the country what it needs to continue to prosecute this war. It's brilliant, beautiful. Oh, I apologize. I forgot this was a video, not a still shot. And this is from the other night, last Wednesday, actually, when the oil tanks were hit. The hit on Saturday was not as spectacular as this because it appears that they were targeting some critical units, some critical piece of machinery. We don't know what. But whatever it was, it shut the plant down. Now, this is also a video. This is from Serbia. And Serbia is not a country we have talked about as a domino. Serbia is on the edge, right? They've been solidly in bed with Russia forever. Solidly pro-Kremlin, solidly pro-Putin. Except it turns out that they were secretly selling weapons to NATO countries, which were then being funneled into Ukraine. Moscow did not like that when that came out, boy. There was a lot of shit thrown at Serbia by the Russians when it turned out that they were playing both sides of the fence. Now, so we haven't ever talked about Serbia as a domino to watch because it seemed to me that that's all it was, right? Just another corrupt country under the aegis of the Kremlin that seemed pretty solidly in their corner. And maybe they were playing both sides of the fence a little bit to make some money, but we don't see any real change there. Even these changes, even these protests that you see here, 100,000 people on the streets of Belgrade, has less to do with moving toward the EU or moving away from Russia than it does with internal corruption in the country. But of course, any authoritarian government that's in bed with the Kremlin is going to be corrupt. And on November 15th, a building in the town of Novi Sad, Serbia, collapsed, killing 15 people. I guess it was like a canopy archway or like an overhang. And apparently it collapsed because of corruption in the contractor business with the government. And so the people are out in force. Now, there have been apparently protests in Serbia for weeks. But again, I didn't pay much attention to it because it seems small scale and it didn't really play into our conversations. Now that is changed as of today, Tuesday, the 28th of January. This huge protest started out as a small 24-hour blockade of a principal intersection in Belgrade, led by students. So a bunch of college kids strike from the university, hold some protests, then they decide to block this major intersection. They were then joined by worker parties that declared a strike, by farmers that came in from the countryside saying that they were going on strike. The movement just grew it appears quite organically, out of the Serbian population in protest to the ongoing corruption in the country. Now, the response from the Serbian prime minister was to call for calm, etc., until today. Today, he resigned. This is a big deal. Not only did he resign, but the mayor of Novi Sad also resigned, right? Guy's on the take, obviously. So Prime Minister Milos, and I apologize because I'm not going to say this properly, Vucevic, did resign today amid this turmoil. Students are demanding at this time the release of all the kids that were arrested during the protests of the last few weeks and the dismissal of all charges. But they know that they scored a big win today with his resignation, boy. That's movement in the right direction. Now, under the Serbian constitution, the parliament has 30 days to either appoint a replacement or call for snap elections. We're going to watch this because if they call for snap elections in the next 30 days, we could see a whole change of government. There is a movement to join the EU inside of Serbia. And so we could see this domino fall, right? A domino that I didn't even have on my bingo card. But things are changing, man. The world is paying attention. And it's had enough of the shit from Putin and his type of goons. Now, on the subject of goons, and this should be a warning to the United States. After our disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, which I do not blame on Biden, I blame on Trump for legitimizing the Taliban and having conversations with them, and then broadcasting the date of our withdrawal. Stupidity of the first order. What happened? What do you think happened? Our enemies moved in. That's what happened. We are literally giving up our leadership position in the world every day that we suffer under this buffoon in the White House. Now, what happened was the Russians created what they called the Afghan Quad. Dig this. It's Russia, Iran, Pakistan, and China, all working together with the stated goal of stabilizing Afghanistan. Iran and Russia, stabilizing forces in the world. Give me a fucking break. You got to be kidding me. It's unclear what it is that they want to extract from Afghanistan. But I promise you, they are not there to stabilize it. Now, they had asked India to join them, but it appears that India will be declining, will be formally rejecting this opportunity in the next few days, because of the involvement of longtime antagonist nation Pakistan. The Indians don't trust the Pakistanis. They don't want to work with them on the Afghanistan deal, even though the shared border makes it important, right, for India. The Pakistanis, for their part, are having trouble because terrorist organizations inside of Afghanistan keep launching terror raids across the Pakistani border, and so there's the potential for that kind of violence to spread as well. War between Pakistan and Afghanistan is not impossible, or at least very much like we saw in Syria with Turkey going across the border to secure the border regions and get a buffer zone to keep the terrorists out. We're going to have to wait and see what happens. But in my opinion, the Afghan Quad should be an object lesson to Americans of what happens when you pull out of your international commitments. Your enemies move right in and they become the power in the region. I don't understand why we are abnegating our responsibility, why we have left everybody in the lurch with this. I know why, because Trump's entire deal is to limit American power. That's what he's about. It's to destroy the American federal system and limit our power in the world. It's obscene. Now, Chasiv Yar has been under a lot of pressure, right? The Russians have been trying to take Chasiv Yar for months and months and months. The body count here is enormous for the Russians, not in the good way. And just yesterday, we got confirmation of a scaled armored attack that was apparently completely destroyed by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians apparently got a bunch of Javelin missiles recently, anti-tank missiles, and those were used to destroy the armored column that was coming at Chasiv Yar. Those ATGMs, those anti-tank guided missiles, like the Javelin, also were put to use in Kursk, where at least 3 tanks and 12 armored personnel carriers, or ISVs, a mix of those. So about a dozen armored vehicles and 3 tanks were all destroyed one after another. The groups came in, 1 tank, 4 armored personnel carriers. The Ukrainians had the supply of javelins. They destroyed each armored column as it came in. It's my understanding that the weather played a big part of this. Because the weather has been warm, all the snow in Kursk has melted. The roads are the only way to move heavy armor. So right off the bat, you know where they're coming in because they got to take a road, right? Then on top of that, the Russians have dropped dozens of glide bombs on this region. Those glide bombs create huge craters. Those craters now look like a series of little lakes that are creating choke points where the armored vehicles have to go through. The Ukrainians sat on the hills overlooking these choke points and took them out one after another, is apparently what happened. The movement of these tanks was further complicated by Russian Dragon's Teeth. The Russians had put in defensive fortifications known as Dragon's Teeth to thwart Ukrainian tanks. Well, now those very same defensive fortifications are protecting the Ukrainians from Russian tanks. So it's another solid win for the Ukrainians inside Russia. Now, we talked about this on last night's live, and I made a video about it. But I wanted to come back to it for a minute because it's, in my opinion, It's a tragic story that really highlights how difficult the situation here in Ukraine is for so many people. So many people have relatives inside of the occupied territories who the Russians don't hesitate to threaten in order to get leverage over people here. So, for example, the wife of a Ukrainian prisoner of war was recently approached by the FSB to try to get information out of her in exchange for not, I guess, torturing and killing her husband. That was the threat. I cannot imagine the strength of will it took that woman to go to the Ukrainian authorities and set up a sting to arrest her the potential handlers, the FSB agents working here in Ukraine. But she did it. And I stand in awe of that kind of backbone. And there's a lot of it here. I got to tell you, there's a lot of it here. But there are a lot of folks, like my buddy whose aunt wrote him out of the will when he joined the Ukrainian armed forces to fight the Russians. How dare he fight the Russians? He's out of the will. Putin is right about one thing. The Russians and the Ukrainians have deep, deep ties. Stalin deported hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to Russia. So which is why we get so much partisan activity inside of Russia today, right? Because the descendants of those deportees know who they are. They're not confused. It's not so easy for some people. This child is 17 years old. So I have no intention of standing in judgment of her. But what's being said about her, she was arrested on charges of selling information to the Russians, or trying to anyway. She didn't succeed. She was arrested before she could give them the information they wanted. The plan, she was a cadet at a military academy, 17 years old. Again, I know legally in Ukraine that makes you an adult, but come on, 17, you're a child. She's in a military academy in the West. She's recruited by the FSB. They offer her a lot of money if she will sell out her comrades, give the coordinates of the administrative buildings, the training grounds, the dorms. And she did, or she was going to. It appears that she was not successful in getting her information to her FSB handlers before she was arrested by the SBU. Now, I mention this because we have another case that has just come up. In the case of former Odessa city council deputy, Igor Dmitriev. Igor Dmitriev is a traitor. He was an adult when he went over to the Russians. Make no mistake. But boy, does he regret it. Look at this Telegram post with me. Look at what he says in here. Check out here where the red line is. But unfortunately, as practice has shown, we do not know what to bring to people, neither in Ukraine nor in Russia, nor anywhere else. And we cannot influence this. Personally, I have spent half my life promoting the Russian world, which in the end turned out to be a network simulation for supporting gas contracts. That right there is the best definition of Russia today that I have ever seen. It's a shame that the whole thing stinks of a traitor's regret. You can take a look at this second one here. So this is taken from Telegram. What it says up there, show original. What that means is I translated this from the Russian, right? So you're able to look at it in English. And one more thing, the most effective way for Russia to get Ukraine back, if it really needs it, is to take care of itself. A little late for that, pal. You picked the wrong side. You know you did. You regret it, and now you're stuck. And when the revolution comes, it's likely you'll be the first one with your back up against the wall, Igor. Finally, last year, 2024, U.S. weapons sales exceeded a record $318 billion, in excess of $318 billion. Now, why is this important? $318 billion into our economy is huge, right? I mean, as a percentage of the economy, it's small. The economy is about 24 trillion now. So talking about 318 billion, it's a drop in the bucket. But it provides lots of good paying jobs to lots of Americans. And that's one of the reasons why I cannot understand Americans who don't want to clean out our attic, give the old shit to Ukraine, and build new shit for our boys. I don't get it at all. Now, a lot of this 318 billion is in export sales that's driven by fear of Russia and by countries like India, who have traditionally bought Russian hardware, who are now abandoning their partner, right? Russia has canceled contracts on India, which has left India in a pinch. So it is now turning more and more to the West. Plus, everybody can see the failure of the latest and greatest modern Russian weapons, quote unquote, on the battlefield of Ukraine, having their asses kicked by 30-year-old ATACMS that, closer to 40, right? The production dates on some of the ATACMS I've seen here in Ukraine is 86. Reagan paid for these. And people are bitching that we're sending them to Ukraine. It was about to cost us tens of millions of dollars to decommission them. A lot cheaper to send them to the Ukrainians and let them do what Reagan wanted them to do, wreck the Russians. So these people that argue that we're sending all our money to Ukraine have no clue what's going on. No clue at all. All right, guys, that's the news that we are waking up to for Tuesday, January 28th. I'm Peter Alexievich, and I'll see you in the live tonight.